Good morning. Welcome to New Thought Community. Today I'm going to talk about this collective moment. And quite a heavy moment it is too. There's a lot going on in our world right now. So I'd like to talk about a couple of different concepts, fitting in, loneliness, and belonging. And present some ideas for some strategies of ways that we can navigate through this moment together. So let me start by posing a question that I always really enjoy posing to my students. Many of you know I'm a professor at Fresno State. I teach a variety of classes about interpersonal communication and connections, and so this is something that's relevant in a number of classes. What's the difference between fitting in and belonging? Probably easily starting to click through your brain some of the differences between the two, right? You're probably pretty clear, yeah, they're different. And here are some ways in which I experience those things differently. And that's very similar to my students' responses. Immediately they're like, okay, yes, those are different things. Let me kind of list what it means to fit in. Let me list kind of what it means to belong. And then we do kind of some compare and contrast across those two lists. We have lots of examples of fitting in our culture. We come from a society that emphasizes the importance of fitting in, whether it's having a table to sit at in the cafeteria, or having a group, a collective that we can identify as ours. In interpersonal communication, one of the ways that we talk about that is through the terms in-group and out-group, that we are motivated, partly because society motivates us, partly motivated for other reasons that we'll talk about in a few minutes, motivated to find our in-group, to find our people. And when we do that, we by nature also begin to identify people that are in out-groups, people who are not our people. Right? Whenever we talk about inclusion, we are by nature also talking about exclusion, because whatever we don't include, we are now beginning to exclude. So as people, we seek out social situations that make us feel comfortable. And part of what helps us feel comfortable is feeling like I'm in an in-group situation with people that are similar to me. And so in some ways, identifying our in-groups is a positive thing, right? I mean, it's good to feel comfortable. It's good to feel like, okay, these people get me and we share these things in common and they appreciate these things about me and really see and understand these things about me. That those are all positive consequences of in-grouping. However, there are also some negative consequences of that. And part of what's negative about that is that we can insulate ourselves into those in-groups so much that it becomes really easy to only look at facts that support our beliefs. It becomes easier to ignore or just not even see or recognize evidence that is contrary to our positions or our ideas. It also starts to create this climate where I can start to see people that are in the out group as other, right? We can do an us versus them kind of situation. And those are things that can fuel a sense of disconnection. People in society also work on sorting us too, right? On categorizing and placing us into categories. And we do that in part as a product of necessity, that we're trying to make sense of our world. And part of how we make sense of our world is by categorizing and labeling things. So, okay, that's neutral, and also swings towards the positive a little bit because it helps us navigate the world. However, when we or other people identify, oh, you must be in this group, that becomes problematic if it doesn't leave any space for that person to say, hi, actually, that's not true for me. So on one level, it can be kind of unintentional and sort of reflexive and reactionary to sort other people. At its worst, at its most extreme, and unfortunately, we have seen examples of this in our history and also in present day society, it leads to stereotyping and dehumanizing other people. So, we know that this idea of fitting in, right? Brene Brown refers to it as sorting. Sorting is on the rise in our culture. We see it a lot. We've seen it a lot throughout society. Trends indicate that now more than ever, we are incredibly sorted as a society. Right? So I'm talking large systemic we, in this case, the societal we. However, we also know that feelings of loneliness are also on the rise too. In 1980, research showed that about 20% of people identified as feeling lonely. In 2018, that 20% jumped to 40%. Right? So we're really sorted, we're also really lonely. Okay, so what does it mean to be lonely? Right? I mean, we use that term a lot. One of the other things I play with my students sometimes is, what's the difference between being lonely and being alone? We usually have a really fun time playing with the comparing and contrasting those two experiences. The social scientists will define loneliness as perceived social isolation. Let me say that again. Perceived social isolation. The perception piece is really important because the perception is our reality. So when we measure loneliness, we're not measuring your reality, your real isolation. What level are you really isolated, quote unquote? We're measuring how much you perceive to be isolated because that perception is your reality. So, can we fit in and feel socially isolated, aka lonely? Yeah. If you have ever been with another person or with a group of people and felt alone, then you should be resounding, yes, I can fit in, I can be with somebody, but still feel socially isolated. So when we talk about loneliness, a lot of times we're talking about a particular kind of loneliness, which is referred to as social loneliness, which refers to a lack of networked relationships that someone is a part of that shares common interests and activities. So that sounds a little bit like fitting in, a little bit like sorting. Okay, well, this shared network, I'm similar to them, kind of like my in-group, sorta yes, sorta no. So let's talk a little bit about the why I say sorta no. So part of what facilitates our perception of connection, right, is repeated positive interactions with people, with even a small group of people. We hear people refer to this too in different ways when they say, it's not the quantity of the relationships that we have, it's the quality. And yes, it's about quality. So it's about some quality repeated interactions with individuals who we perceive are going to be supportive and helpful to us when we need it. So if I need something emotionally, instrumentally, whatever it might be, if I believe that, okay, there are certain people in my life, certain primary attachments, connections that I have where if I need something, I can pick up the phone and I can say, hey, I'm in need, and believe that they're going to pick up the phone and say, okay, I want to show up for you, that's going to help me feel socially connected. If I feel like, I don't really have a lot of those repeated interactions, I have some people in my life, if I call, maybe they'll show up, maybe they won't, that's going to increase the level in which I perceive social isolation, aka I feel lonely. Another helpful way to think about how we define loneliness is to think about how we measure it. So a lot of times in social science research, when we're interested in a particular variable like loneliness, we will develop a scale so that we can survey people in order to, again, measure how much they're experiencing a particular variable. So in the case of loneliness, one of the most commonly used loneliness scales is a list of 20 items, and it identifies, it's just a statement, 20 statements, And next to it, the person taking the survey would indicate how frequently, from 1 to 4, they experience that statement. Okay? So let me give you some examples of some of those statements on that loneliness scale. I lack companionship. I feel as if nobody really understands me. My interests and ideas are not shared by those around me. I feel left out. I feel completely alone. I am unable to reach out and communicate with those around me. I feel isolated from others. People are around me, but not with me. So the degree that somebody would say they frequently experience those feelings or those things, the more likely they are to be lonely. They will measure higher on the loneliness scale. Right? They have more perceived social isolation in their life, at least at that point. Okay? So rates of loneliness are increasing. However, rates of sorting or fitting in are also increasing. So trying to surround ourselves with like-minded friends, neighbors, people, and separating ourselves from people who we think of as dissimilar or as outgroupers hasn't really delivered in terms of any real deep sense of belonging or actual sense of connection, which is what it is that we're craving, right? We want the connection. We want the sense of belonging. We want to both be around people and feel connected to those people. But we're not really getting that with the sorting, with the in-grouping that we're doing. So, okay, what do we do about that? First, I think we recognize that when we're starting to feel a sense of loneliness or starting to perceive that we're lacking some of that connection, it's an opportunity to connect back in. Our bodies, our brains, our beings as human beings are amazing, phenomenal tools for us in that our bodies flag us when it needs something, right? We know what it feels like to be hungry. We know what it feels like to be thirsty or start to feel dehydrated. We know what it feels like when we really need to sleep or we really needed to take a break from looking at social media or looking at Zoom or looking at a computer screen. Our bodies tell us that. Loneliness is our body's way of saying, hey, we really need you to connect back in. We need you to get some of that quality connection from other people. This makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint because as human beings, we have survived in part because of our ability to work together in community. It's together that we create, that we communicate, that we solve problems, that we build things, that we move forward, we invent, we innovate, we feel, we do all of those things together as a collective. And way back in evolutionary history, we did that by grouping together as communities and hunting and gathering together and caring for each other's young and protecting one another. And now, of course, we live in a civilized, modern, and industrial society, yet we still need that sense of community for survival. We still need community to create things and to move forward and to innovate and really thrive as human beings. We need that connection. We are wired to be connected to each other. We're social creatures. So if we know, okay, I need to be connected, and sometimes we start to feel like we're disconnected, we start to feel socially isolated or frustrated, or we need something, I need support, I need advice, I need a ride to the airport, right? There's all kinds of things that we need from people at different points that give us opportunities to recognize I'm inherently a social creature and I need other people and I need that connection. And I don't get that connection from sorting myself into my in-group. I need that connection. I need that connection from belonging. Okay, so what is belonging and how do we promote it? Right, let's move there. according to the belonging hypothesis, yep, that's a thing. That's a thing in social science. Maybe one of the sassiest titles that I know of. The belonging hypothesis says that we have a pervasive drive to form and maintain lasting, positive, significant interpersonal relationships. This is part of the reason I have a job, researching and teaching the kinds of things that I do. I'll say it again. We have a pervasive drive to form and maintain lasting, positive, significant interpersonal relationships. These are those enduring, connected, quality relationships. We're having frequent, pleasant interactions with those people. These are connections that make us feel good, right? This is what's moving us out of in-group, okay, where we sit at the similar lunch table, to belonging, to connection, to real true connection. Brene Brown differentiates it. She refers to it as true belonging, and she defines it as the following, I quote, "The spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are." I like this phrasing of it because it's a recognition of both our autonomy and our connectedness. That, okay, I belong to me. I know who I am. I am an authentic person. I'm going to show up authentically and feel connected and feel like I'm a part of something larger. For me, this is really the crux of the difference between belonging and fitting in. Because oftentimes when we're fitting in, we're not 100% showing up as our authentic, brightest version of who we are. Fitting in requires levels of compromising around who we are, what we do, our ideals, and any level of compromise, at least according to this definition of true belonging, isn't really belonging. Here, I am 100% authentic in myself and know that I'm also connected and a part of something. Well, that sounds great to me. I imagine it sounds great to at least some of you too, this idea of true belonging, of these positive, enduring connections with people who we feel really strongly and comfortable in knowing, all right, if I need something and I reach out, they're going to reach back. They're going to be there for me. And that's a good relational space to be. So let's talk about a couple of ways that we can promote that sense of true belonging. First one, okay, isn't really a way per se. It's more of a recognition of the spiritual truth that you do belong. You belong. I belong. We all belong. And we are all inherently connected to each other. That's one of the first things that I really recognized when I started showing up at New Thought Community, to kind of feeling it out, see if this whole NTC thing is for me. One of the things that I recognized in what people were saying and some of the themes that were coming up in messages and in talks and in the vision, mission, and purpose is this notion that we are inherently connected to one another. That we are all manifestations of the divine spark. We have different ways of talking about divine spark. People refer to it as God, Buddha, Pachamama, spirit, source, goddess, whatever term resonates with you. I tend to use spirit or source quite a bit personally. We're all manifestations of that oneness, of that divinity. There's a spark in me, there's a spark in you, there's a spark in my kitty Kevin, who's sleeping on the chair next to me here. There's a spark in each one of us. That spark connects us to source, connects us to God. It also connects us to each other. It binds us together. A variety of authors, thinkers, philosophers, theologians have different ways of talking about this same spiritual truth. Brene Brown talks about it as, quote, inextricable human connection. Inextricable human connection. Another author that I really appreciate is Glennon Doyle, and she also talks about this, and I'd just like to read a little blurb from her book, Love Warrior, because I just really appreciate the way that she terms the phrase here. I am loved and have always been loved and will always, always be loved. I have never been separated from this love. I have only convinced myself that I was. Sister, who needs an umbrella when you're the whole sky? Desmond Tutu also embraces this. He talks quite a bit about it using the term Ubuntu, which is a South African philosophy of connection and togetherness. And I'll just read a little blurb from his book, The Book of Forgiving, which I highly recommend if you're interested in the topic of forgiveness or interested in the topic of connection, because it's a thread that really artfully weaves through the book. He says of Ubuntu, the word literally means humanity. It's the philosophy and belief that a person is only a person through other people. In other words, we are human only in relation to other humans. Our humanity is bound up in one another, and any tear in the fabric of connection between us must be repaired for us all to be made whole. The interconnectedness is the very root of who we are. So one of the ways we promote true belonging is just remembering that we don't have to work at it. We don't have to do anything to create it, because spiritually we are inherently connected to each other. We inherently belong to each other, to the world, to this historical moment. We just belong. It's just inherent. We don't need to hustle for that. So this collective moment, it feels to me a little bit like a moment of crisis. Right? Many of us at New Thought and beyond have studied a particular kind of shamanism called the Pachacuti Mesa tradition. Pachacuti is a way of referring to an upheaval, right? And we're really in a moment of upheaval right now in our world, right? So this collective moment requires us to remember that we're one, that we might be sorted in different ways in society, right? In different social groups or political parties or professions or socioeconomic classes or fans of different sports teams. I mean, there's all different kinds of ways that we sort. And so we might be sorted differently. However, our shared humanity binds us. And it's time for us to remember that. To see the divinity in ourselves and to recognize the same divinity in every single other person. The second way that we can promote true belonging is showing up together for each other. In this collective moment, people are in pain. People are scared. People are uncertain. People are worried. People aren't sure. People are stressed. And we need to show up for each other in that. According to Henry Nouwen, in his book Out of Solitude, he says, quote, the friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not curing, not healing, and facing with us the reality of our powerlessness. This is a friend who cares. And this is tough work. This sums up what it means to hold space for each other, to be willing to show up, to be willing to sit in the uncomfortable, to be willing to sit and recognize you are in pain, and I'm going to sit here with you in this pain so that you know that you're not alone in it. That's hard work. It's emotional work. It's spiritual work. It's required of us right now. Another way we can do that, or maybe another phrase or way that we talk about doing that, is by having empathy for each other, by having compassion. Marshall Rosenberg, who's written a lot about nonviolent communication, defines empathy as listening with our whole being and feeling with another person. I'm not trying to fix it. I'm not trying to give you advice. I'm not trying to sympathize. I'm not trying to make you see the silver lining in a difficult situation. I am sitting here, my whole self, present with you in what you're feeling. In some ways, that's more difficult than, oh, let me try to fix you. Fixing you is likely more about my own discomfort about your pain than it is about your pain. The way to really deal with that is to just show up, right? Brene Brown talks about it as showing up for collective moments of joy and pain. They create opportunities for us to bear witness to that inherent human connection, to the inherent oneness. She found in her research that people with the strongest true belonging practices maintain their belief and connection by engaging in moments of joy and pain with other people, a lot of times with strangers. That's been one of the things that's been really difficult for many people, myself included, during this pandemic, is the fact that there are certain collective moments that we can't show up for right now. I mean, most churches have not been meeting because people have been sheltering in place. And that's now starting to slowly change. But before that, and even right now, because we're not in the sanctuary doing this live, you're watching a recording for the virtual service, people were looking for other ways of doing that. So they were attending services on Zoom. They were going to support groups on Zoom. I've been teaching my classes on Zoom. People are FaceTiming. People are going to virtual services. Even when we have these constraints on our ability to show up physically together, we can still show up for each other. And in moments like this, where potentially showing up physically with each other can put people in jeopardy, the socially responsible thing to do then is, okay, let's find other ways to connect. And we have. We have really seen the beauty and the depth of our human creativity and desire for connection. This is a new way for us to experience our oneness and remember our oneness. We can also show up for collective moments of pain, right? When we attend funerals, when we attend vigils, when we show up to support groups because we are in crisis or we're in distress, or we know other people are in distress, so I want to be there for those people. Opportunities for collective moments of pain. This collective moment requires that we remember our inherent oneness and that we find ways to show up for each other. I'd like to leave you with a couple more quotes just to wrap this up. This one is from Desmond Tutu. When we have hatred for others, we carry that hatred in our own hearts, and it harms us even more. Certainly more than it harms them. We are created for fellowship. We are created to form the human family, existing together because we were made for one another. We are not made for exclusivity or self-sufficiency, but for interdependence. We break this essential law of our being at our own peril. We take care of our world by taking care of each other. It is both as simple and as difficult as that. It's up to us to take care of each other. This is a moment where we can show up and we can do that for each other. Just one more from Glennon Doyle. This really wraps things up really nicely, I think. Our human family is dismembered because we have been taught to fear each other. To have peace, we must allow love to bring us back to each other. to remember. We are just scattered pieces of the same puzzle. So when we hurt each other, we hurt ourselves. My idea of heaven is the completion of that scattered puzzle. Be brave, because you are a child of God. Be kind, because everyone else is too. We belong to each other. This collective moment is an opportunity to remember we belong, to remember that we belong together. And for that, I am so grateful. Namaste.